Colorado Territory, 1875. A fierce winter wind howled across the rolling grasslands of Cottonwood Valley, scouring the land like nature's own vengeance. Nathan Forrester pulled his sheepskin coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he surveyed the endless stretch of his struggling cattle ranch. At 26, he had the weathered hands of a much older man, though his face retained the clean-cut handsomeness that belied the hardness he'd cultivated inside. "Another dead steer," he called to his ranch hand, pointing to the carcass half buried in snow. "Fourth this week." Nathan's jaw clenched as he dismounted, kneeling beside the fallen animal. 5 years of back-breaking work, and the Forrester ranch remained barely above water. He'd built it all himself after his parents died of fever 3 winters past, determined to honor their dream even as loneliness gnawed at him like a hungry wolf. "Boss," his foreman called. "Mail came in from town. Got something with your name on it." Nathan brushed snow from his knees as he stood, taking the envelope with gloved hands. His eyes narrowed at the fancy script. A letter from the Colorado Matrimonial Gazette, confirming that his mail-order bride would arrive on Thursday's train. A mistake. It had to be. Nathan had never sent for a bride. "I never wrote to any damn matrimonial service," he muttered, crumpling the paper. "Maybe your aunt did? She's always fretting about you being alone out here." Nathan scowled. His mother's sister in Boston, no doubt, meddling again. The thought of some city woman arriving, expecting a husband, sent a surge of irritation through him. Love was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. The frontier demanded everything. Every drop of sweat, every waking hour. The men who divided their attention between the land and a woman usually ended up losing both. "Right back. Tell them there's been a mistake," Nathan ordered, though he knew the letter would never reach them in time. The frontier's no place for someone who doesn't understand what they're getting into. Love is for people who can afford the distraction. That night, as cold seeped through the log walls of his cabin, Nathan stared into the fireplace, a half-empty whiskey glass in his hand. His parents had loved each other fiercely, but that hadn't saved them. Their devotion had simply meant they'd died within days of each other, leaving Nathan to shoulder their dream alone. Love made you vulnerable. Out here, vulnerability got you killed. Thursday arrived on a gust of unseasonably warm air. Nathan had sent his foreman to meet the train with instructions to explain the misunderstanding and arrange return passage for whoever arrived. He kept to his work, mending fence lines that had buckled under winter's assault. Late afternoon found him returning to the ranch house, surprised to see smoke rising from his chimney. As he approached, the door swung open, and a young woman stepped onto the porch. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, with honey-blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, though wisps had escaped to frame her face. She wore a simple blue traveling dress that had seen better days, and her green eyes studied him with unexpected steadiness. "Mr. Forrester, I presume?" Her voice carried a slight southern lilt. Nathan dismounted slowly. "Ma'am, there's been a misunderstanding. Your man explained," she interrupted, folding her hands before her. "But I'm afraid I can't return east. I've spent everything I had on the journey here." "And you are?" Nathan asked, approaching cautiously. "Willow Nelson, age 20, your correspondence bride." She lifted her chin slightly. "Or I was supposed to be." Nathan removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Miss Nelson, I never sent for a bride. My aunt apparently took it upon herself." "Yes, your man explained that as well." She hesitated, then forged ahead. "Mr. Forrester, I propose a compromise. I'll work, cooking, cleaning, whatever's needed, until I can earn my passage elsewhere. I'm not asking for marriage or promises." Something in her steady gaze made Nathan pause. Most Eastern women would be in tears by now, but Willow Nelson stood straight-backed on his porch like she belonged there. "Where are you from?" he asked, curious despite himself. "Virginia, originally. Before the war." A shadow passed over her face. "Though I've been in Philadelphia the last few years." Nathan studied her. The ranch desperately needed a cook and housekeeper. His attempts at both were dismal at best, and hiring help out here was nearly impossible. 3 months, he said finally. "You can stay and work for 3 months. Then we'll see about getting you somewhere else." Relief flickered across her face before she masked it. "That's very fair, Mr. Forrester." As he showed her to the small room off the kitchen that would be hers, Nathan told himself this was merely a practical arrangement. Nothing more. The sooner she earned her passage and left, the better. 2 weeks passed. Nathan found himself returning to the ranch house earlier each day, drawn by the smell of fresh bread and the strange comfort of finding a lamp lit in the window. Willow proved herself capable beyond measure, not just with household tasks but helping birth a calf when his hands were occupied elsewhere, treating a ranch hand's infected cut with herbs she'd gathered herself, even balancing his chaotic ledger books with unexpected skill. "Where'd you learn all this?" he asked one evening as she set a plate of venison stew before him. Willow hesitated, her hands lingering on the table edge. "My father was a doctor before the war changed everything." "And accounting?" A small smile touched her lips. "I worked for a merchant in Philadelphia." Nathan nodded, sensing there was more to her story but respecting her privacy. Everyone out west had something they'd left behind, himself included. That night, Nathan caught himself watching Willow as she mended a shirt by firelight, her profile illuminated by golden flames. Something stirred in him, something he thought had died with his parents. He silenced it immediately. Getting attached would only complicate matters. In a few months, she'd be gone, back to civilization where she belonged. The following morning, Nathan rode out early to avoid breakfast together, choosing instead to lose himself in work. By midday, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the spring deluge they desperately needed. He was checking a stream bank when gunshots echoed from the direction of the ranch house. Nathan spurred his horse instantly, racing back as rain began to fall in heavy sheets. By the time he arrived, he was soaked to the skin and filled with dread. 2 unfamiliar horses stood hitched outside. Through the downpour, he could make out voices raised in anger. Drawing his revolver, Nathan approached cautiously, slipping through the side door into the kitchen. He found Willow backed against the stove, a cast-iron pan clutched in white-knuckled hands. 2 rough-looking men faced her, trail-worn and dangerous. "Tell us where Blackwell's gold is, and maybe we'll let you live," one was saying. "I've never heard of any Blackwell," Willow answered, her voice remarkably steady despite the fear in her eyes. "That's not what your husband said before we killed him," the second man sneered. Nathan felt a cold shock run through him. "Husband?" Before he could process this revelation, the first man lunged for Willow. Nathan stepped into the room, his gun leveled. "That's far enough." Both men whirled, reaching for weapons, but Nathan had the advantage. "Drop them," he ordered. "Now." For a tense moment, he thought they'd draw anyway. Then, seeing the determination in his eyes, they let their guns clatter to the floor. "Willow," Nathan said without taking his eyes off the intruders, "get rope from the barn." She slipped past quickly, returning moments later with coils of rope. Under Nathan's watchful eye, she bound the men securely. "Who are you?" Nathan demanded. "And what's this about gold?" "Ask your pretty wife," the taller one spat. "She knows all about Blackwell's treasure." "I'm not his wife," Willow said, her voice tight. "And I know nothing about any treasure." Nathan studied her face, seeing genuine fear there, but something else too. Recognition. She knew these men, or at least knew of them. "The sheriff will sort this out," Nathan said finally. "We'll take them into town tomorrow." That night, with the would-be thieves secured in the storage shed, Nathan confronted Willow in the quiet of the kitchen. "You had a husband," he said simply. Willow's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. "Yes. And now you don't." She set the plate down carefully. "He died 6 months ago. These men seem to think you know something about gold." She turned to face him fully, her green eyes filled with a wariness he hadn't seen before. "My husband was involved in things I didn't understand. After he died, men started coming around, asking questions, making threats. That's why I answered your aunt's advertisement. I needed to disappear." "So you lied," Nathan said flatly. "I omitted," she corrected. "And I've worked honestly for my keep. Would you have accepted me if you'd known trouble might follow?" Nathan had no answer for that. Instead, he asked, "Is there gold?" "No," she said, and he believed her. "Whatever Robert was involved in, he never shared it with me. I think it was just a story he told to attract investors to schemes that never panned out." Nathan nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, we'll take these men to town. After that," he left the sentence unfinished. "After that, I should probably move on," Willow finished softly. The thought hit Nathan harder than he expected. He turned away before she could see his expression. Spring unfurled across the valley, bringing with it new calves, fresh grass, and an unexpected piece to the Forrester ranch. The would-be thieves had been jailed in town, identified as known outlaws with a history of following false leads about hidden treasure. With no evidence connecting Willow to any wrongdoing, the sheriff had dismissed their claims as desperation. Still, the incident had changed things between Nathan and Willow. A wariness had crept in where ease had begun to grow. Nathan found himself watching her when she didn't notice, not out of suspicion, but with a growing awareness that the woman who moved so confidently through his home remained largely a mystery. "You should have told me," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset paint the mountains gold. "Would you have shared your past with a stranger?" she countered gently. Nathan considered this. Fair point. They lapsed into silence, comfortable despite everything. Below them, the valley spread out in verdant splendor, cattle dotting the landscape like scattered chess pieces. "This is beautiful land," Willow observed. "Your parents chose well." "They did," Nathan agreed. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing it justice." Willow turned to study his profile. "You work from sunrise past sunset. You care for your animals and your men with equal attention. How could you be doing more?" "My father used to say land needs more than sweat to thrive. It needs heart." Nathan rarely spoke of his parents, finding the memories too painful, but somehow, with Willow, the words came easier. They had such dreams for this place. Not just cattle, but orchards, crops, a real community. "Why haven't you pursued that?" Nathan shrugged. "No time, not enough hands." And he hesitated. Those were their dreams, built around the family they wanted to raise here. Without that, it seemed hollow somehow. Willow nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Dreams can change, Nathan. They should." The way she said his name, he'd only recently convinced her to use it instead of Mr. Forrester, sent an unexpected warmth through him. In that moment, sitting beside her with the day's last light gilding her hair, Nathan realized something terrifying. He was falling in love with a woman he barely knew, whose past remained shrouded in half-truths and danger. Summer arrived with unprecedented heat, baking the valley and testing man and beast alike. Nathan worked alongside his hands, moving cattle to higher pastures where grass remained green and streams still flowed. Returning home exhausted each evening, he found the ranch house transformed under Willow's care. Vegetable gardens now flourished behind the house. The threadbare curtains had been replaced with cheerful fabric she'd ordered from town. Even his ledgers showed improvement, with her careful management stretching their limited funds further than he'd thought possible. She was making a home where he'd merely maintained shelter. One scorching afternoon, Nathan returned unexpectedly to fetch tools and found Willow standing before his mother's old piano, a wistful expression on her face as her fingers hovered above the yellowed keys. "Do you play?" he asked from the doorway. She startled, then composed herself with a small smile. "I used to. A lifetime ago." "Play something," he suggested, crossing to open the lid that had remained closed since his mother's death. Willow hesitated, then sat carefully on the bench. Her fingers touched the keys tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. A melody filled the room, something sweet and melancholy that made Nathan's chest ache with remembered joy. "That's beautiful," he said when she finished. "My mother taught me," Willow replied softly. "Before the war took everything." Nathan sat beside her on the bench. "Tell me about your family." She glanced at him, surprise flickering across her features, then looked back at the keys. "We had a small farm outside Richmond. My father practiced medicine, my mother taught music to neighboring children. My brother was studying to follow in father's footsteps." Her voice grew distant. "When the war came, father and Thomas both served as battlefield surgeons. Neither returned. Our farm was burned during a cavalry raid." "And your mother?" "Died of grief. I always thought, though the doctor called it pneumonia." Willow's fingers drifted across the keys, not pressing hard enough to make sound. "I was 17, alone, with nothing but the clothes I wore." "How did you meet your husband?" Nathan asked, suddenly needing to understand all the pieces of her past. Willow's hands stilled. "Robert was a northern businessman who came south after the war, buying up land cheap from desperate families. He offered me a position as his secretary, then marriage." She looked up, meeting Nathan's eyes directly. "It wasn't love, but it was survival. I was grateful for that, at least." The honesty in her voice touched something in Nathan. He understood survival choices all too well. "What about you?" she asked. "You never speak of your life before coming west." Nathan found himself telling her things he'd shared with no one. About growing up in Boston, his father's business failures, the consumption that nearly claimed his mother, the doctor's suggestion that dry mountain air might save her. How they'd sold everything to start fresh. How for a few precious years it had worked. How quickly pneumonia had taken them both when it finally came. They talked until evening shadows stretched across the floor, sharing pieces of themselves that had long remained buried. Something shifted between them that day. A trust that hadn't existed before, a connection that went deeper than the easy companionship of recent months. That night, lying awake in his bed, Nathan confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. Willow Nelson had become essential to him, not just for the work she did, but for the warmth she brought to his life, the way she challenged him to see beyond mere survival. The 3 months they'd agreed upon had long since passed, yet neither had mentioned her departure. Nathan realized with stunning clarity that he didn't want her to leave, ever. The thought terrified him. A crisp September morning found Nathan riding fence lines along the property's eastern boundary when he spotted dust rising on the horizon. Visitors were rare this far from town, and something about the deliberate approach sent warning prickles up his spine. He whistled for his ranch hands, who joined him as 3 riders came into view. They were well-dressed men, city folk rather than the rough outlaws he'd half expected. At their head rode a distinguished gentleman with silver-streaked hair and expensive leather gloves. "Nathan Forrester?" the man called as they drew near. "That's me," Nathan confirmed, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Maxwell Blackwell." The man introduced himself with a tip of his hat. "I believe you're harboring my daughter-in-law." Nathan kept his expression neutral despite the shock that ran through him. "I employ a housekeeper." "Willow Nelson." "Willow Blackwell," the man corrected smoothly. "My son Robert's widow." "May we speak privately, Mr. Forrester? This is a family matter." Nathan considered the request, noting the expensive guns his companions wore. "My ranch house is just over that rise. We can talk there." As they rode, Nathan's mind raced. Blackwell, the name the outlaws had mentioned in connection with gold. What had Willow gotten herself entangled in? And why hadn't she told him her married name? When they arrived, Willow was hanging laundry in the yard. Her face drained of color when she saw the visitors. "Maxwell," she acknowledged, her voice carefully controlled. "Willow, my dear, you've led us on quite a chase." Blackwell dismounted with the ease of a much younger man. "Did you really think you could disappear so completely?" Nathan positioned himself between them. "Mr. Blackwell, whatever business you have with Miss Nelson," Mrs. Blackwell, the older man corrected. "And my business is quite simple. My son entrusted certain documents to his wife before his untimely death. Family papers of great sentimental value. I've come to retrieve them." "I have nothing of yours," Willow said flatly. Blackwell sighed dramatically. "Come now, child. Robert's ledgers. You took them from the safe before you fled Philadelphia." Nathan glanced at Willow, seeing confirmation in her tense expression. "Gentlemen," Nathan addressed Blackwell's companions, "would you mind waiting by the corral? I believe we can resolve this matter civilly." Once they'd moved away, Nathan turned to Blackwell. "Sir, I don't know what's between you and your daughter-in-law, but this is my property. I'll thank you to maintain a respectful tone." "How gallant," Blackwell remarked dryly. "Has she told you who she really is, Mr. Forrester? What she's done?" "I know enough," Nathan replied steadily. Willow stepped forward. "What Robert discovered about your business dealings was criminal, Maxwell. Those ledgers prove you've been defrauding investors for years." "Ah, so you admit you have them," Blackwell smiled thinly. "That simplifies matters." "I gave them to the federal marshals before I left Philadelphia," Willow said. "I kept copies to ensure my safety. If anything happens to me, additional copies will find their way to authorities and newspapers across the country." Blackwell's composed demeanor cracked slightly. "You're bluffing. Try me." Willow's voice held steel Nathan had never heard before. "Your son realized what you were doing and planned to expose you. That's why he died so suddenly and mysteriously, isn't it?" The accusation hung in the air between them. Nathan watched understanding dawn on Blackwell's face. That Willow wasn't the frightened widow he'd expected to find. "You have no proof of that outrageous claim," Blackwell said coldly. "Perhaps not enough for a court of law," Willow conceded, "but enough for doubt. Enough to tarnish the Blackwell name in every financial circle that matters. Is that what you want, Maxwell? Because if you continue pursuing me, that's exactly what you'll get. Nathan watched the silent calculation in the older man's eyes. Finally, Blackwell nodded curtly. You've become quite formidable, my dear. Robert would be proud. He replaced his hat. Keep your distance and your silence, and perhaps we can both live comfortably. With that, he returned to his companions. Minutes later, the three riders disappeared over the ridge. Nathan turned to Willow, seeing her differently now, not just as the capable woman who'd brought warmth to his home, but as someone with courage he'd only glimpsed before. You should have told me, he said quietly. Willow's shoulders sagged slightly. At first, I couldn't trust you. Later, she hesitated. Later, I was afraid of how you'd look at me if you knew. Exactly how you're looking at me now. How am I looking at you? Like you don't know me at all. Nathan considered this. Maybe I don't, but I'd like to. Willow studied him, uncertainty in her eyes. I should leave. Maxwell won't give up so easily. Running hasn't solved anything so far, Nathan pointed out. Maybe it's time to stand your ground. That evening, Willow told him everything. How her husband had discovered his father's Ponzi scheme that had ruined countless families. How he died suddenly after confronting his father. How she'd found and secured evidence before fleeing. The outlaws who'd come earlier had been hired by Blackwell to retrieve the ledgers, using stories of gold to avoid implicating themselves. I'm sorry for bringing this to your door, she finished, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Nathan reached across the table, covering her hands with his. This is your home now too, Willow. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The words surprised him as much as her. But as he said them, he realized their truth. Somewhere between grudging acceptance and daily routine, this remarkable woman had become essential to his life, to his dreams for the future. October painted the valley in russet and gold. 2 federal marshals arrived at the ranch, summoned by telegram after Nathan convinced Willow to take her evidence to the authorities. They left with copies of the ledgers and promises of protection. Blackwell would face justice for his crimes, and for Robert's death, if it could be proven. The day after the marshals departed, Nathan rode to town alone, returning with a small package he tucked carefully into his jacket pocket. That evening, he asked Willow to join him on a ride to the high meadow where wildflowers still bloomed despite autumn's approach. They dismounted near a grove of aspen trees, their leaves shimmering gold in the late afternoon light. Nathan spread a blanket on the ground, unpacking a simple picnic he'd asked the cook to prepare. This is lovely, Willow said, gazing out over the valley that spread below them. I've never seen this part of the ranch. I come here to think, Nathan admitted. My parents are buried on that rise. He pointed to a small hillock where 2 markers stood. They loved this view. Willow's expression softened. It's a beautiful resting place. They ate in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. When Nathan finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. When you first came here, I told you the frontier was no place for love, that it was a distraction men like me couldn't afford. He turned to face her fully. I was wrong, Willow. This land, it needs more than sweat and blood. It needs heart, like my father said. You helped me see that. Willow's eyes widened slightly. Nathan, please, he interrupted gently. Let me finish while I still have the courage. He took her hand in his. I thought I was building something here, but I was just surviving. You showed me the difference. From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, his mother's, simple gold with a modest pearl. I don't know what the future holds. I can't promise we won't face more trouble from your past, but I know I don't want to face any of it without you by my side. Tears welled in Willow's eyes as she understood what he was asking. I love you, Nathan said simply. Will you marry me, Willow? Will you build a life here with me? For a moment, she didn't speak, and fear clutched at Nathan's heart. Then she smiled through her tears. I came west believing I would never love again, that all I could hope for was safety. She touched his face gently. You gave me so much more. Yes, Nathan. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close, kissing her with all the love that had grown in his heart these past months. Around them, aspen leaves danced in the breeze, applauding the promise of their future together. Spring 1876. Nathan stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as a wagon approached from town. Beside him, Willow cradled their newborn daughter, Elizabeth, born just 3 weeks earlier. "They're here," Nathan called over his shoulder. From inside came the sounds of his ranch hands finishing preparations for the celebration to come. The wagon drew closer, revealing Nathan's aunt from Boston and several families from town who'd become friends over the past year. Today marked not just the baptism of their daughter, but the official opening of the Forrester Ranch School, Willow's dream, now realized in the converted barn where children from outlying homesteads could receive an education. As guests disembarked, Nathan wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders, marveling at how much had changed in a single year. The ranch was thriving, expanded now with orchards and crops alongside the cattle operation. The federal case against Maxwell Blackwell had concluded with his conviction and imprisonment. Most importantly, the Forrester home had become the heart of a growing community, just as his parents had once envisioned. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to Willow's temple. She looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. Beyond words. As they welcomed their guests, Nathan reflected on the false belief that had nearly cost him everything. That love was a weakness on the frontier, that vulnerability meant certain defeat. In Willow, he had found not just love but strength, not just companionship but purpose. Together, they had transformed a hardscrabble existence into a life worth living, proving that even in the harshest landscape, love could not only survive but flourish. And as their daughter slept peacefully against her mother's heart, Nathan knew with absolute certainty that the greatest wealth a man could possess wasn't gold or land, but the love of family and the promise of tomorrow. The frontier had tested them both, stripped away their pretenses, and forged something unbreakable between them, a love as vast and enduring as the western sky above.